Good afternoon. It's wonderful to see you here today and wonderful to see so many old friends and colleagues. Thank you for joining us for the 8th Clark Kerr Lecture. The Clark Kerr Lecture Series, obviously, honors Clark Kerr, president of the University of California from 1958 to 1967, and long recognized as one of the greatest leaders of American higher education in the 20th century. These lectures provide a forum for analysis and reflection about the forces shaping universities and the complex roles that they play in modern society. Recipients of the honor are selected once every 2 years and sponsored by the Center for Studies in Higher Education. It's my pleasure to introduce this year's Clark Kerr recipient, President Diana Natalicio of the University of Texas at El Paso. Dr. Natalicio became UTEP's president in 1988. During her long and distinguished career with the university, Dr. Natalicio has also served as Vice President for Academic Affairs, Dean of Liberal Arts, Chair of the Modern Languages Department, and Professor of Linguistics. Her sustained commitment to provide all residents of the Paso del Norte region access to outstanding higher education opportunities has helped make UTEP a national success story. During her tenure, UTEP's enrollment has grown from 15,000 to over 25,000 students, its annual budget from 65 to more than 500 million. University of Texas El Paso was designated as a Carnegie R1 university, recognized nationally for the excellence and breadth of its academic and research programs. In 2017, Dr. Natalicio was named one of Fortune magazine's top 50 world leaders. In 2016, she was honored with a Hispanic Heritage Award in Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math, and she was included on the 2016 Time 100 list of most influential people in the world. In 2015, the Carnegie Corporation of New York honored her with its prestigious Academic Leadership Award. In 2011, she was presented with the Orden Mexicana de la Aguila Azteca, the highest honor bestowed on foreign nationals by the President of Mexico. We're very excited to have President Natalicio discuss with us today how she's built a Hispanic serving institution at University of Texas El Paso as UC Berkeley initiates part of its strategic plan to become a Hispanic serving institution in the next decade. Please join me in welcoming President Natalicio to the stage. Thank you, Kerr. Thanks so much.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Buenas tardes. I'm delighted to be with all of you here, and I thank Dean Brady and everyone else on the UC Berkeley campus for your warm welcome. This invitation honors me, but it also honors the many UTEP students who have succeeded far beyond anything that most people would have predicted, and that's what excites me. It's the idea that we really have an opportunity to demonstrate that talent is everywhere, that it crosses all boundaries, gender, ethnicity, race, socioeconomic level, geography, whatever it might be, and how much talent has been squandered through the past 100 years among the Hispanic population because there was simply no access for them. So my work is actually a joy for me. I can't think of anything that I'd rather be doing, and I'm happy to share a little bit about that today. Whenever I'm introduced in a setting like this and I'm hearing all these things about all the great things that I've done, I'm always happy to be seated with my back to the audience because I think it's so shameless to sit and kind of smile as if you really think that you're somehow all that good, and that it is important to remain humble in these jobs because that's the way we are going to be most successful with the students that we serve. But I'm also reminded of how wonderful it is to be around young people who disarm you at nearly every stage of your relationship with them. So what do? Well, the first homecoming that I celebrated more than, well, now 32 years or 31 years ago, I was very excited. I was a new president. We were going to have the best homecoming ever. And we were going to have a parade, and we were going to have all these things. And the student government group was organizing this homecoming parade. And so they were to pick us up. My executive group and the alumni members, and they were to take us to the parking lot of the Sun Bowl, which is on our campus, so we could board the convertibles to ride in the parade and let everybody cheer. So we waited for the student to come, or the students to come, and they didn't come, and they were quite late. And we thought, well, okay. And the president of the Alumni Association, a kind of really type A guy, said, let's get in my van. This is ridiculous. We're not going to wait for them. And so just then, a Camaro pulls up in front of the Alumni Lodge. And it's no ordinary Camaro. It has flames on the hood. And this young man jumps out, and he says, I'm here to pick you up. Now, there were like 20 of us. And that's when the president of the Alumni Association said, that's it. Anybody who really wants to get over to the Sun Bowl, get in my van, because this is not going to work. So I somewhat presidentially said, I'll ride with him. So I get in the Camaro with the flames on the hood, and I reach out and shake this student's hand, and I ask him his name, and he told me, and I asked him what his major was, and he told me. And then he looked at me and he said, who are you? Perfect. Perfect. That's exactly what we all need from time to time, is a little zap from somebody who just disarms us and makes us think a little bit about who we really think we are. So I love what I do, and I've done it for a long time, and I'd like to tell you or share with you today some ideas and thoughts and perspectives that I've had through the years that have really changed the trajectory of UTEP. We were founded as a mining school in 1914. We were Texas School of Mines, so we had a science and engineering base, geology and engineering, mining engineering. And so we were a STEM school long before most regional colleges were STEM schools. Most of them were teacher preparation or a lot of other things. And so we were able, with that base, to do at least a little bit of research, even though it wasn't mostly funded or anything like that. We grew during the latter 1920s. We expanded our programs, and we began to add programs to prepare teachers, because the young women in the El Paso area, we were serving a surrounding region, the young women didn't want to be mining engineers or geologists. They wanted to be school teachers and other things. So we broadened our programs, and we began to offer teacher preparation and English and history and a lot of other things that we hadn't offered before. And for a long time, we continued to be regionally focused. We absolutely were committed to educating the people in the surrounding region. Then we went through a phase in the 50s, 60s, even early 70s, where we decided that being a regional university wasn't good enough for us. And that's at a time when funding for higher ed was growing at the federal level, and there were a lot more opportunities. And so we decided we wanted to be a prestigious university, nationally known, and we actually had bumper stickers that said Harvard on the border. Now, that's amusing in a way, but there's also a certain pathos in wanting to be something that you shouldn't ever have wanted to be in the first place. But we had this sense that we decided to build dormitories, and we were going to import students, people said, from Iowa. I don't know why Iowa, but that's what they said. And so we began to change our vision of what our mission was to kind of a national elite university of some kind to compete with all those others. And that clearly, by the time I became president, had not worked. First of all, we weren't that university. We didn't have any research. We weren't prestigious. We didn't build the dorms. We didn't do any of those things. And we were very uncomfortable with who we were. And so gradually what we tried to do was pull the pendulum back to where it should have stayed in the first place, which was to educate the people of a region. And that's what we focused our attention on. Now, our region is 80% Hispanic. Our community is 80% Hispanic. Our university at the time I became president was less than 50%. And today, I'm happy to say we're back to aligning with the population of the region. We're at 83%. So the result of that was that we began to think about other things like access and what kind of community is this? And one of the most important things we did in this quest to become real and authentic as an asset for our region, which is what we're supposed to do. We're a public university located in a historically underserved region. It was our responsibility to serve the people in that region. That's what public universities do, except for flagships and others that attract students from all over. In Texas, there are about 37 four-year institutions strewn across the state, and each of us has an ecosystem, a region that we serve. Unfortunately, much of the time what happens is that efforts are made to normalize us, to make us like everybody else. And with the advent of a lot of data analysis, the data metrics actually force us into some kind of normalization. We resist. Believe me, we resist, but it's very difficult sometimes to deal with the expectations of the legislature, the University of Texas system, the Higher Education Coordinating Board, all of those entities which push us all into a single dashboard of what they value. And we knew that we had to avoid that at all costs. And so we began that quest by studying the region. Ecosystem is critical. You have to understand, who are you serving? Why are you serving them? Are you serving them well? Who are they anyway? And so we began to do an extensive amount of research on our region. And of course, what we learned was that higher education was having a relatively limited impact on the development of the region. We were a low-wage, low-skill economy. Prior to NAFTA, our major industry was garment manufacturing, Levi and Farrah. And so most of the employees were low-wage, low-skill workers. Levi and Farrah were advantageous because they offered benefits, retirement, and security. And so when NAFTA occurred, 12,500 women, mostly middle-aged, single moms in public housing, monolingual in Spanish, lost their jobs. All the sewing machines went to South Asia, they went to Mexico, Guatemala, and Nicaragua, all kinds of places, and took those jobs away. So the economic development vision then of our region became replacing the jobs that were lost by those women. So the whole agenda, the whole rhetoric about our economic development, and the one that we took out on the road to sell El Paso to companies, was we were cheap. We were low wage, we had cheap land, cheap construction, cheap labor, cheap everything. And that was the model that, I'm sorry to say, even until today, I think many of the people involved in economic development really don't understand that they're still trying to find jobs for the low wage, low skill people in our region, who are fewer and fewer, by the way, because we're educating far more. And they fail to realize that if we didn't educate our population, we were never going to have anything to sell to the people who might relocate to our region. You have to have people who have some level of education, and they were aiming low. Now, part of this, I think, is the low self-esteem that we have had in El Paso. Been on the border, that's always kind of negative. We've had a variety of challenges by our location. And so what happens is that with low self-esteem, you aim low in what you aspire to. You don't aim to get Amazon, you aim to get some call center or something of that sort. So we underestimate the capability of our people in our economic development activities. And I'll just add a parenthesis here. One of the consequences of that is, with all the progress that UTEP has made, and we've made a lot of progress, obviously over the past 30 years we've worked really hard and successfully to change the composition of our student population, the composition of our graduating classes, everything is aligned now with who we are as a region. The problem now is that the brain drain has become even more serious because we've educated people past what the economic development can absorb. And so we're exporting now huge numbers of graduates, especially in STEM, but also in business, finance, for example. They're going to Wall Street, they're coming out here in computer science and cybersecurity and all kinds of things. And so we invest heavily in educating a population that is historically underserved, and yet the yield on that investment is going someplace else. It's going to Fort Worth, to Lockheed, or it's going to Wall Street. It's going someplace else. And so that investment hasn't yet paid off in terms of the quality of life and prosperity of our region. And that's a disconnect that is truly serious, and one that I work on constantly to talk to the leadership in our community about how important it is that they re-examine their concept of who our workforce could be. They're just not doing that. And I don't know whether this is low self-esteem or they don't know how to go about it, but it's certainly something that we worry about a lot because of the big investment that we've made. We would love to have more of these graduates in our community. They would certainly change the quality of life. We don't really have a creative class in El Paso yet. The people who stay after graduation are teachers and health professionals, and they stay in large numbers and help our quality of life by doing a good job of teaching and health care. So we've gone through a number of cycles in terms of UTEP's growing ambition and growing success, and its disconnect with the power structure in El Paso. But the other part of that is that we have an extraordinarily fine connection now with the people we are supposed to be serving. We have a wonderful relationship with the schools, with the community college, and with young people across the community and high schools. And I visit a lot of schools regularly, and we try to remain very, very tightly wound with them because they send us 80% of the students who enroll at UTEP are graduates of those high schools. And so and I'll have another word or two about that in a moment. But when we began this quest, the study of the ecosystem was critically important because we were going to have to redefine UTEP. And we were not only going to have to convince ourselves that what we were doing was right, but we were going to have to protect that from people who wanted to measure us by statistics and data that weren't relevant, we thought, or even antithetical to the work that we were doing. Example would be SAT and ACT scores. We don't require them. We don't ask students for those data. And we don't do that because we've done the analyses ourselves on our own student population, and what we find is that if we take a group of graduating seniors and we look back at their ACT and SAT scores, they have no predictive value. They're just all over the map. They don't tell us who's most likely to be successful. And we believe, I certainly deeply believe, that to keep someone away from an opportunity or to eliminate an opportunity to get higher education, because we're the only university within 350 miles of El Paso in the state, denying them that opportunity really changes the trajectory of their lives. And to do that on the basis of an instrument that you know is not telling you what you need to know about success, it's immoral to tell them, no, you're not going to come in and get a shot at this. So we give them the chance. And they don't disappoint us at all. They're smart, they're hardworking, and they will do anything to get this education. They believe in higher education as the trajectory that will change not only their lives, but the lives of their families, younger brothers and sisters and everyone. And the one good thing about, frankly, about these jobs that students are getting in New York and all over the country is that they get paid high enough salaries that they have money to spare to provide younger brothers and sisters with opportunities to grow and develop. So it's a kind of a legacy commitment that they make, and to ensure that their younger brothers and sisters do not experience the difficulties that they had to experience. And they do experience a lot of difficulties. A little bit about our students. They are 80+% Mexican American. There are 25,000 students, so that's a lot of Mexican American students in one place. And those students come from backgrounds of extremely modest means. Close to 40% of our students report a family income of $20,000 a year or less. If you think about what $20,000 a year can buy you, it's not much. And so they have to work long hours, they have to do a lot of things to keep their heads above water. And in many instances, they are the chief breadwinner for their families, because they and maybe a couple of their siblings have to work in order to provide, because there are disabled parents, there's elder care, there's child care, there are all kinds of things that they have to deal with. So as part of our ecosystem study, we had to learn more about our students as people, not just as students with test scores or meeting requirements or whatever, but as people. One of the problems I think we have in higher ed is that we don't really look at a faculty member, if you're a student, looking at a faculty member and seeing a human being. You see somebody highly accomplished, that doing all kinds of great things that you've never done. And so you don't really see that there's a human side to this person. There are a lot of exceptions, of course, but often the students stand in awe, particularly first-generation students. They stand in awe of these faculty because they are so accomplished. They're uncertain. They have kind of a fear of somehow falling out of favor, because many of the people that they've dealt with have been very authoritarian in their world of work or whatever it might be. So they are intimidated, and they can't see through that exterior to understand that there's a real person there who cares about them. And I think many more faculty care about students than is apparent by just talking to them or listening to them, especially if you're a student in a formal classroom setting or laboratory setting. But the faculty also, in so many cases, don't really know the students as people. You teach a large class, how are you going to know everybody in their background? And even in small classes, some faculty just don't seem to have that capacity to reach out and get to know students. Our students are very good, though, at helping faculty know them as people in a variety of ways. They talk to faculty. They are always very respectful, but will tell you, I cannot come to class on Thursday because I have to take grandma to the emergency room, or not emergency room, but to the hospital. And you know, you can say, okay, that's not a good excuse, but if grandma's sick, it is a good excuse. And we have to try to be interested in each other as people rather than as professor-student relationship. All of this is very familiar to me because I was a first-generation college student. I grew up in St. Louis, and I went to a high school that was abysmally bad. I didn't know it. I thought it was fun, actually. I belonged to some social clubs, and I thought it was kind of just a nice interlude in my life. But what we didn't get was any kind of preparation to go to college. In those days, they were preparing a workforce, the boys to go into the labor unions as apprentices to work for Monsanto and Anheuser-Busch and all the big companies, and the girls were supposed to marry. And if the girls didn't marry right away, then they would be temporarily, they'd be in a secretarial job. The result was that the boys took machine shop and woodworking, and the girls took secretarial studies and home economics. And so in high school, that's the preparation I got. When I completed high school, not having any idea what else I would do except go to work, I did. I went to work. And I went to work in a company that had a job just ideally suited for me to be a typist and a receptionist and a switchboard operator. Now, everybody knows what that is, right? Yeah. Okay, so I was the Lily Tomlin of Nordberg Manufacturing, basically. And I would connect calls, say, good morning, how may I help you, Nordberg Manufacturing, blah, blah, blah. And you do that 100 times, 200 times a day, it gets pretty old. I mastered every function of the switchboard. I could connect, disconnect, transfers, all kinds of calls. And within a month, I was bored and I was afraid because I was 17 and I was out of high school, and I knew that that was not possible as a future for me. I wasn't planning on getting married right away, and so I thought, what am I going to do? And I felt like that switchboard was just swallowing my future. You know, every day that I went in, I became more repelled by that switchboard. So I decided I wanted to go to college. And in St. Louis at that time, there was not a single public university. Think about that, how things have changed. Not a single public university. The public university was in Columbia, and the engineering school was in Rolla, Missouri, both land grant. And so I couldn't afford to go away to school, so I ended up going over to two possibilities, St. Louis University, Washington University. Those were the two schools. I chose St. Louis University over Washington University because the tuition was $50 a semester lower at St. Louis University. It was $375 a semester, and Washington U was $425 a semester. Think about it. And I could get to St. Louis University on the bus. Very critical. Turns out transportation for our students is a huge issue and one that you can't overlook. You can't just think about the academic programs. So I went to St. Louis University and asked the Jesuits if I could enroll. And they asked me where I went to high school, and they rolled their eyes and said, well, we've not had anybody from Cleveland, what do you expect us to do? And I said, I'm a hard worker. I'll work hard. I promise, I'll work hard. And they said, well, we'll give you a chance, but know that you're going to have to work harder than you ever have in your life. So I quit my full-time job, got a half-time job, which was close to SLU, and I enrolled, and I was scared to death. The whole first year, I was convinced I was going to fail because I had such poor preparation. The boys, most of the boys at St. Louis U had gone to St. Louis University prep school, and they swaggered around talking about how they had read Dante, and I didn't even know who Dante was, and so it was it made me very scared. And so I'd go to school in the morning, then I'd go to work as a secretary in the afternoon, and then I'd go home on the bus, and then I'd study as late as I could, and then get up in the morning the next day and do the same thing. So I was on a real fast pace because I just had so much catching up to do. But to their great credit, the Jesuits are wonderful educators, and they really did help me to become a much better student and then to really just enjoy being a student. And that happened over the 4 years that I was at SLU. When I finished SLU, the university was trying to become trying to have a Phi Beta Kappa chapter. And so the graduating seniors, by then I was in the honors program and really feeling empowered by education. I mean, I really felt it, and I knew what it was doing for me. And so I was about to graduate, and they asked if I would apply for all kinds of fellowships and scholarships, of which in those days there were many. Federal funding for a whole bunch of things, Fulbrights, NDEAs, NDFLs, and all kinds of programs. And so I applied for everything out of gratitude to St. Louis University for having given me a great education, thinking I would never get anything. Well, I got them all. And the first one I got was a Fulbright to Brazil for a year. And I got a letter from my congressman, And it was like, wow, this has to be a mistake. I can't be going to Brazil. That wasn't part of the deal. I wasn't expecting to go. I was just applying because I appreciated St. Louis U, and I wanted to show them that I was grateful. And so I walked around for 3 days with a letter from the congressman, not telling my parents, not telling anyone at SLU, not telling anybody anything, because I decided I would turn it down. But then something kind of happened, and that was part of, I think, what transformed me at St. Louis U, was that I had a little more confidence. And so I ended up accepting it, and I'd never been on an airplane, never been away from home, and here I was flying down to Rio. And it was just an amazing experience, because I knew that if I remember walking to the airplane, and I had carry-ons that were enormously heavy because I thought there was nothing in Brazil. I was going to have to take everything with me. And so I was walking across the tarmac. There were no jetways in those days. And something kept telling me, your mom and dad are just right back there, and they'll love you even if you don't go. And somehow I just kept putting one foot in front of the other. And I see our students doing that all the time. They just take a deep breath, and they step out on the precipice, and they do great things. And so that year in Brazil was the most transformative of my life, because I was on my own. I was in a country where I didn't speak the language very well at the beginning, but ended up learning Portuguese very well. And the result of that was that then that started a whole series of dominoes, where I was recruited in Brazil to be a TA in Portuguese at the University of Texas at Austin. And then I got a fellowship to Portugal. It was the 60s, and things were kind of going well in those days for students who wanted to pursue graduate degrees. And I went to Portugal for a year and a half, went back to Austin, got my doctorate, and ended up teaching in El Paso. I went there as a trailing spouse. My then husband was offered a tenured position, and I had just gotten my PhD. And so I went in as a visiting assistant professor, and our plan was that we would leave El Paso for another place where there'd be 2 tenure track jobs, and we would do that as quickly as we could. But once we got there, we both loved El Paso. The people were wonderful. Being on the border, living in 2 countries at the same time, I mean, it's magic what you can do in a place like that, a metro area that's binational, and that 2/3 of the people are on the Mexican side. And there was very little border control. You could go back and forth 3 times a day if you wanted to, and all you had to do was say, U.S., and they'd say, welcome back, and you drive on through. No, and now you look at what we go through to go across the border. We have 1,000 students who commute from Juarez to UTEP, and most of them do it every day. And as you might imagine, the rhetoric about the border over the past year or so, coming out of Washington, has been absolutely devastating for our students from Mexico, because the uncertainty and the bullying by the president, talking about how bad these people are on the border, and we're the safest city of our size in the country, it's just totally wrong. It's very ugly and bullying. To treat people that way, because they're such good people. They're humble, they're modest, high-achieving, strong, resilient, hardworking, all those things. And so when we decided to stay, I then managed to become a department chair and a dean and provost. And when I got to the provost level, I did a 5-year plan. I was doing what I was supposed to do. And my predecessor as president announced he was leaving for the University of Missouri, and the presidency was open. And so at first I said, no, I've got 2 years left on my strategic plan as provost, so I'm going to continue. And the thought then came to me, well, wait a minute, if we get a president who doesn't really concur with your vision of what you're doing as provost, it won't take very long for you not to be provost either. So why don't you just go for it? And so I did, and I got the job, much to my amazement, frankly. And it was another big step that began back at St. Louis University, where I was empowered to take risk, and to do things that I would never have done before. And so that's the environment we've tried to create at UTEP, is an environment where students know that we support them. And we try to do everything we can to prevent, to create buffers from some of the big risks they face. The biggest of which is money. Our students struggle all the time about financing their lives, much less their education. It's just amazing how many burdens they have financially and how difficult it is for them to live on the resources that they have. But they are resilient. They're wonderfully resilient because they have to be tough to lead the lives that many of them have led. And so we realized that we had so much to work with if we could just adjust our policies, our practices, everything that we do. We have to examine closely. We examined the ecosystem. We knew who our students were. We knew the demographics. We knew a lot about them. But what are we doing that may be actually impeding these students' success? What are the practices and policies? Well, one of them was the SAT and the ACT. We were requiring it because we had been told we should by the UT system and others. And we did the research, we looked at the data, and we learned that it wasn't a good predictor. And so we declared that we were just not going to look at it anymore. The students take it in high school, they're required to, but we don't pay any attention to it. And I try, as much as I can, not to report it anywhere. We have to report it to the federal government together with 4-year and 6-year graduation rates, but none of that means much to us or our students, frankly. And so a lot of that kind of sacred icons of higher ed are dysfunctional in our environment, and they actually create barriers for students. They don't help students earn a place in a prestigious university. What they do is deny opportunities to students who have no other opportunities. And so we worked very, very hard on looking at our own data. And we do that relentlessly. And one of the things that we realized was that we were in a closed loop with the K-12 sector, the community college, and UTEP all educating the same students. The school districts, the community college, and UTEP were bound together by the commonality of the students that we served. And yet we were blaming each other. Well, if the schools would send us better students, they could do better at UTEP, and they would say, well, send us better teachers, and then we'll do better. And it just kept going, this kind of blame game, which obviously brings the finger of blame right back to you because you're in part of the loop. And so we established something called the El Paso Collaborative for Academic Excellence, which is a partnership between the 12 school districts, the community college, and UTEP, every educational institution in our region, 350 miles to the next region, and we began to work together. And we were fortunate, we got some NSF money from a program called the Urban Systemic Initiative, and we were able to provide professional development for teachers. We were able to change the curriculum and a lot of other things in our College of Ed. We did a whole lot of things, always based on data. We never took a step without having reason to take that step. And that has served us extremely well because those data not only validate for us the job that we're doing, but it also helps convince those who would have us change what we do that what we're doing actually makes sense in our setting. And so we've worked very, very hard at the data gathering, and we've learned so many things about our students that are valuable to us in serving them. And so, for example, we've looked at the whole issue of money, which is huge for our students. In every respect, it impacts them. And so what we've done is to change our drop policies. We don't let students drop out of school without having a serious conversation with someone who knows about financial aid and someone who knows what the consequences are of dropping out of school. The students always say, look, my car broke down. I have childcare, I have a job, I have family elder care, other family responsibilities, and I have school. The only one of those that's at all flexible is school. So I'm gonna stop out this semester. I'll be back next semester. The data showed they don't come back. Their lives go off in a different direction. So we have to prevent them from dropping out. Heroically sometimes. We have to throw ourselves in front of their bus because otherwise they're gonna go ahead in making a bad decision that a break job changes the trajectory of their lives. We can't let people do that. So what we've done is to create a pay dirt loan program, which draws from our mining school history, and we give them $500, no questions asked. You need how much? $500. Okay, here it is. Or any amount less than that. What they don't have is a cushion, a financial cushion. They have jobs. They're earning money to survive. But when a catastrophic event occurs, and they all drive relatively old vehicles, there aren't very many Camaros or Teslas on our campus, but when there's an emergency, they begin to be hounded by collectors. When they have an emergency room bill, for example, the collectors come and they're very unreasonable and nasty and frightening. And so they begin to think, okay, I just can't deal with this. They could go to payday loans, right? But that's not a good solution because that's kind of a lifetime commitment. And so what we try to do is give them just enough to get done what they need to get done so they can complete the semester. And in some cases, they're graduating seniors the next semester. And they're going to be engineers or computer scientists. And you say, do you realize you've got to learn about finances? And so we do a lot of training for our students in financial planning and thinking, understanding that if you complete your degree, even if you have to borrow as seniors $10,000, let's say, you're going to be able to pay that back. You're going to get a job at $85,000 or $90,000. No problem. Not a problem. But they sometimes think borrowing $10,000 is like catastrophic. They'll never be able to pay it back because their families have never had that kind of income. And so all of those sorts of things we work really hard to do. We're very careful about class scheduling. Very careful. We teach courses on Saturdays, we teach them at night, we teach them early in the morning. We teach them wherever we can and whenever we can to accommodate students' needs. We try very hard not to allow the fact that we don't have capacity in a class to delay a student's graduation, which used to happen because faculty had the power to say, I'm not going to take one more than 30. And you've got 2 students who, if they don't get to take the course that fall, they won't graduate. And that's something that we have to try to avoid. So for us, Hispanic serving institution is not about the demographics of our student population. It's not about a census. We were a Hispanic serving institution long before that term was even used, because we, even at less than 50%, we were Hispanic serving by comparison with most other schools. But our challenge then was to figure out not only to help the students graduate, because we want our graduating class to also mirror the demographics of our region. If you have access, but you don't carry that access all the way through to graduation, it's not authentic, it's not real, it's a false promise. So if you admit students and you don't do everything in your power to help them graduate, you failed in terms of access, because they need help all along the way. Not a lot, but there's some common themes that you can do that are so simple, like wedging 2 more students in a class in order to give them the chance to graduate on time. It's so simple in so many ways, and yet it's so complicated because we have complex governing structures. We have a lot of complications relating to facilities and money and all kinds of things. But the important thing is the students. And so we work really hard on that. I'm happy to say now our graduates, the profile demographically of our graduates mirror those of the freshman class or the entering students and of the community that surrounds us. So we are now enabling students to walk in the front door and then graduate, and that's also very powerful. We do lots of data analysis on that. But we're getting better students now too. We're getting better students because of this partnership with the school districts, the community college, and data are the key to that relationship. So we have bi-monthly meetings. The president of the community college, myself, the superintendents of the 3 largest school districts, and a couple of representatives of the business community. We meet twice a semester at a minimum, sometimes more. We don't sit and talk about how bad the legislature is treating us or anything like that. We talk about data. And we have such granular data now. We can go into a single classroom in high school to talk with that teacher about the performance of his or her students in pre-calculus, because what we've seen in our calculus class is that students from that school aren't doing very well by comparison with students from other schools. So we're down to the classroom level. We share everything. All of our lives are an open book. We don't have any barriers. And what we've tried to do is create a very smooth pathway from pre-K through 16, which we've just about done. There are still loose ends. We still learn things now, but we've made huge strides in making sure that the students who come to us really are prepared. I base that on my own experience. I knew how absolutely unprepared I was. I hadn't taken math. I hadn't taken a lot of things in high school. And so we know that if the students come to us better prepared, they're likely to be more successful. So we stand on their shoulders and we celebrate that. We talk about it all the time. I have a reception for principals, high school principals in our region. And the purpose of which is to thank them for everything that they do to help us prepare students better so that they're more successful at UTEP, because we couldn't do it without them. They have to be helpful. And so it's this closed loop now, but it's functionally working, where before it was closed, but we didn't recognize it as being so. And so with that, we have made huge strides in graduating students, in moving more students in. We've doubled the number of degrees nearly that we grant each year, and that number keeps going up. We have far fewer dropouts. We have a much better ecosystem to serve these students and to ensure that they become the young people with careers and big dreams achieved. The one piece, though, unlike Berkeley, we had the Hispanic designation. We were already that. Even when they invented the term Hispanic Serving Institution, we predated that, so we were automatic entries into that pool. But what we didn't have is a strong research foundation. And if you think about it, if you're just committed to access and you don't provide students with the very best education you can possibly offer them, you're cheating them. You're cheating them because you're making a false promise that somehow this degree is going to be worth something big in the marketplace where they're going to go. And to give students the impression that they're working as hard as they do to get a degree that is not as valuable as what we're saying it is, that's really, again, kind of for me a moral issue. You just shouldn't do that. And so we began to build our research credentials. And we were fortunate because I had some great mentors at historically black colleges and universities. We were one of the few Hispanic universities in those days. This was 1988. And so my mentors were mostly presidents of historically black schools. And they were wonderful. They taught me so much about how to navigate federal funding for minority institutions and a lot of other things. They were very unselfish about it. And so I learned from them about what the programs were at NSF and NIH and a lot of other agencies. And then we began in earnest to seek out resources because we needed the revenue stream from research, but we also needed the faculty and the equipment and the labs and the whole infrastructure that we didn't have. And that was an enormous quest. It was really very challenging because we didn't have the infrastructure to recruit top researchers. We just didn't have it. And so what we did was to try to make partnerships with other institutions, sometimes in our system, sometimes other institutions, to try to get some sort of collaboration. But that was difficult because of our location. We're isolated. And it's not easy to just have another school right in the neighborhood that you can work with or collaborate with. And so we began to realize we were going to have to do a lot of this on our own. And I'm happy to say that we have been able to do that, and we were just designated this year as R1, which was the second of our two big goals. The first was to look like El Paso, educate people who are from our region, and second was to give them the best quality education we could possibly provide. And that would be R1 is one metric for that. And so that's what we did. And reaching that second goal was extremely important because now our students have an entirely different set of aspirations for what's next. The example I've given to a couple of people today is that we had an NIH MARC program, which was a program for minority students in the sciences. And this MARC program was in chemistry. And many years ago, and biology too, many years ago, every year I go to the last class of this student group that meets as a group. And I listen to what they say about who they are and what they've learned. And then I always ask them, so what's next for you? And 20 years ago, when the program began, nearly every single one wanted to go to medical school and be a doctor. This last year, just this past spring, out of 18 students, only 2 said that they wanted to go to medical school. All the others said, I want to enter an MD, PhD program. That's a totally different mindset about what they can do and what they can be and where they can go. And those are the kinds of metrics that for me mean a lot, because that's where you're having the impact at the individual student level. And those students are going off to great postgraduate experiences, and I think that's one of the ways in which we could collaborate here is we've got some great science and engineering students because of our mining school background, but many other students who are graduating highly qualified to compete, and they just need a chance. And so that's something that I talked with your Chancellor today and with others, because I think that this is one of the ways in which we can possibly collaborate, and that would be very exciting for us. We do have some research collaborations with people on the Berkeley campus, and those are productive. They're mostly in science and engineering again, but the Mellon Foundation has provided funding for minority institutions to move students in the humanities to graduate school. And your institution has been a part of that too. So we've really begun to fire on all cylinders. Excuse me, allergies hit me today. So we've been able to do this in a way that's totally integrated with who we are. We've empowered the public schools. They are so much better than they were because they know that we're waiting for their graduates, and we're going to tell them if they're not great. We're going to tell them, hey, you know, your students aren't doing as well as high school X, and create a little sense of, you know, we gotta do better. It's all in the best of mutual respect. I mean, there's nothing combative about any of this, but we're all on the same team. We do educate the same people. And so with the R1 designation, now our next big challenge is regional economic development, because as I mentioned earlier, we're shipping away most of our best trained people. And so what I'm working on now is trying to get our economic development leadership to begin thinking about aiming higher when they're trying to recruit students or companies, because we have the graduates who could work in those companies. And we're hopeful that we're going to make some changes. It's a shame, frankly, to educate students as well as we are and to lose most of them. And so that's something that our region desperately needs, because that's the kind of last piece in this puzzle. And so that's the story of what we've done and how we've done it. And I would say that the valuable kind of understanding that I've gained during this visit is that approaching it from the other side, from the Berkeley side, you have to think about the fact that you are a very strong research university, obviously. And so the question is, how do you achieve access? How do you enroll more Latino students? And so you're approaching this combination of access and excellence from the opposite direction, but that doesn't mean that you can't get it done. What I would caution you is that as you talk about Hispanic serving institutions, that you remember that it's not just about census. It's not just about numbers enrolled as first-year students. It's what you do while they're enrolled to ensure that they're going to be successful through graduation. And it's going to involve ensuring that they have access to this rich research environment that you have at Berkeley. We've had to build our research environment brick by brick, literally. And our research expenditures have grown, indeed, but believe me, it was a long and tough slog. And it's something that, frankly, I was beginning to wonder whether we could ever achieve. And I'm sure that there are some of you who feel that way about the Hispanic serving institution and trying to enroll that population. This can be done. It can be done. I guarantee to you that it can be done. And what you need really are partners. And I'm not just speaking for UTEP now, though we would love to try to work with you to create something that would be exciting. But you need partners all across the board. And I think one of the things that would be really interesting here, just based on conversations, I'm an instant expert on Berkeley, but the idea that you can create a separate ecosystem that's focused on recruiting more Latino students and then trying to merge that and reaching out to the community around you. You don't have to recruit these students from Nebraska. They may be here, and you can do that. So I wish you well in this HSI quest, because I think it would be absolutely wonderful for Berkeley to be an HSI. But I would again caution that we can't just think about it in terms of the percentage of Hispanic students. 25% is the cutoff with the population growth in the Hispanic community. A lot of institutions have backed into it, whether they serve anybody or not. So serving is really the key word in Hispanic serving institutions. Hispanics is important, but serving. And if you talk to people like Sarita Brown and Deborah Santiago in Excelencia, what they will tell you is that that's going to be their focus now. They've become quite combative about this, because they're seeing that many institutions that reach that 25% are only interested in one thing, which is to get a piece of very small federal grant funds for minority institutions. There's really no big payoff. The payoff is in how good you feel about the work that you're doing and the students that you're serving. So if there's anything UTEP can do to help clarify these issues, or we'd love to have you visit, we're always available, because we really believe that the Latino population is the future of this country. If we don't educate the Hispanic population, we're going to be in a very bad place, because it's growing, it's the fastest growing, and we just got to do it. Thank you so much for your attention.